And we're live. Welcome. I think it's just me and one other at this stage. Nope. Oh. We are live. We're back in business. So welcome to this, my first ever live stream. I don't know how this is going to go, how many people are going to be watching or joining in, but I thought, why not? This is uncharted territory for me, so I thought we'd give it a try. And I'm thinking that maybe what I might do is try and start a new live stream, or at least once a week do a live stream. And I'll tell you about an idea that I've had a bit later on for a specific and very special live stream for a specific demographic of the audience. And we'll see how that flies. But today I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about Facebook bans. So obviously a lot of people have been talking about that in the last week or so. I want to talk about just a quick movie review of Black 47, which I watched over the weekend. Game of Thrones and Star Wars, and staying with the theme of Star Wars, Sonic the Hedgehog and Star Wars. So let's get right into it. Facebook. So obviously the topic of Facebook bans has been a bit of an issue in the last week or so. A few high-profile people all of a sudden, found themselves banned from Facebook in one big hit, and a lot of people have been talking about it. And it got me thinking about why this is such an important topic of conversation. Why does it matter that people are or are not allowed to have a voice? And it's interesting watching the responses, and I guess that's what I really want to talk about today, is the responses to those Facebook bans, where you see people who are trying to defend effectively the banning, the deplatforming of people, and they do this in a couple of different ways. Before I get into those specific defenses that people try and mount, I thought I would just give a brief overview about freedom of expression and why I think it's such an important right. Because when you think about freedom of expression, ultimately, it's about ensuring that the human conscience has the necessary protections to be able to express itself, to act in the world. So it's an extension of the right to freedom of conscience, basically, whereby obviously conscience is your interior thoughts. It's something interior to you. It's the things that, that the moral, the ethical propositions that you hold to be true and important, but it's an internal forum. However, conscience then outworks itself in the world through our actions. So through things like our speech and through the way perhaps we might spend money, whether we go to a protest event, whether we might boycott something, whether we might decline to be involved in something. So a classic example of this might be, let's say that your country decides that it's going to engage in an unjust war against another country, and they forcibly conscript as many people as possible to join in that fighting. So they are compulsorily required to go to war. And your conscience says to you, this is not right. This is not good. I'm not going to go to another country and fight a war that I don't believe is a just war. And so at that point, your conscience is now in this situation or in this position of being able to outwork itself in the world. You might engage in acts of speech where you speak up about the unjust nature of the war. You might engage in actual physical acts. Like, for example, you might say, I'm going to be a conscientious objector, and so I will not go to war. Or if I do go over to the war zone, I will be a stretcher bearer, but I'm not going to pick up a gun because I don't believe that this cause is just. And so what you have there is your conscience, this interior forum, is now outworking itself in the world. And this is why the right to freedom of expression is so fundamentally important, because freedom of expression is about protecting and ensuring that your conscience is actually able to dictate how your life is lived, and to be able to operate in the world in a way that's where it's not hindered in a way that's unjust. Obviously, laws are in place to restrict certain actions that we might want to, or some people might want to engage in for good reason. But we're talking here about the unjust imposition and restriction upon a person's conscience. So freedom of expression is really, really important. Now, freedom of expression is one of those rights. Hi there, V. Rossellis, how are you? So freedom of expression is one of those really important rights. whereby it has to fail safe. And what that means is because it has to fail safe, you have to actually accept the fact that there are going to be people who are going to abuse that particular right. So some people are going to use the right to freedom of expression to say quite rude and horrible things to other people, or they're going to use it just to say dumb and pointless things, or they are going to express themselves, even if you might agree with their position, in ways that might be a bit harsh, that you might not necessarily agree with the way they've gone about expressing themselves, even if you agree with what they've had to say. But freedom of expression must never be impinged upon, and you've got to allow that important right to fail safe. So what that means is you've actually got to allow for people who are going to do things that aren't necessarily particularly nice in their speech. Because the reason you allow that is to ensure that you don't have an authoritarian person or government or group that's imposing itself upon someone unjustly and stopping them from saying legitimate things. And then they respond by saying, well, no, we're just keeping you safe, or we're stopping this horrible person from saying bad, nasty things, and we're protecting you. And they use that justification as a cover for an act of unjust tyranny. So you've actually got to allow that freedom, and in order to protect that right, you've actually got to allow people who are going to be perhaps bad actors, who are going to be people who are going to go about things in ways that are not particularly nice. But it's really important that we protect that right. Why? So that people can actually speak truth to power. I know it's an abused saying, that one right now. It can be a bit cliched, and the other side often abuse it. But speaking truth to power is really important. Now, speaking truth to power means that you actually have to have the freedom to be able to actually speak and to allow your conscience to manifest itself in the world. It's actually really hugely important. Now, the only time that you might curtail someone's activity, I think, on social media would be if that person is clearly breaking the law. So let's say someone is using Facebook to try and run some sort of con. They're trying to financially scam people out of money, or they are misrepresenting, or they are presenting lies, so like libel or slander about a person. Or let's say that they're getting online and they're inciting people to violence, and they're saying, right, this particular group, I disagree with them, let's get together now and we're going to go and burn down their houses. That would obviously be a criminal act. Excuse me. That would obviously be a situation whereby you would place appropriate limits and boundaries, because obviously you've got to try and protect the common good as well. But it's one of those things where you have to be very careful, because the ability to actually have a freedom of conscience is so fundamentally important. It's just one of those important fundamental human rights that, it's better to fail safe and as opposed to being too draconian and too over the top about these things, and actually limiting authentic acts of freedom of speech, which are so essential. Now, so that's the I think that's where you have to start from. That's the basic framework. But how does this play out with social media? Because there's two sort of common responses that I hear from people who are trying to justify these Facebook bans. And what you hear from people, one is they will say, well, Facebook is a private corporation. And it's sort of become this common refrain. Well, yes, they are a private corporation, but there's a huge difference here. They are not just a private corporation. Facebook and other social media entities, they are now the new public square, and that is a game changer, because they might well be a private corporation, but they have a control, and it's very much it's almost monopolistic. It's a very small group of people or corporations who actually have control over the new public square. And so it's not simply you signing up to a private corporation to use their service. It's now the private corporation effectively is provides the vehicle for you to actually express yourself, to be in the public square. So it's important that people make that distinction. And it seems to me a lot of people are not making that distinction when they say, oh, it's a private corporation, they can do what they want to. Think about this in another context. Let's say, I don't know, the power company, or your local utilities, your phone company said, well, we don't like the fact that you are opposed to, I don't know, a particular government policy that we think is really good. Let's say there's some new telecommunications policy, and we don't like people who are opposed to this new telecommunications policy, and we don't want them voicing their opinions on it. So we're not going to let them have a phone line, because those people are ringing each other to organise protest meetings. And we don't want them to have an internet connection because they're getting online to express themselves. And we disagree with that. we don't want them to have power, because if they have power at their house, they can hold meetings with these dissenting groups, and we don't want that happening. Now, obviously, that's not how utilities like that are supposed to work, and I think Facebook and other social media companies should be viewed in that same light, because of the fact that the new public square is now the online environment. And I think this really, really matters. And so I don't think it's good enough to say, it's a private corporation. They can do what they want. As my mum used to say, if your friend Tim jumped off a bridge, would you join him? No, you wouldn't, right? So why are we saying it's okay for them to do what we like when we wouldn't actually tolerate that sort of reasoning in other scenarios? To me, it's just not a valid excuse. The other thing that you'll often hear from people is they will say, freedom of speech doesn't mean that you should be free from the consequences of your speech. Now, that's partially true, but it's also kind of false, because in actual fact, when you think about it, that really is the whole point. Freedom of expression is about allowing your conscience to operate in the world. And it's hugely important. A lot of people mistakenly believe that freedom of conscience is simply about the freedom or the right to believe what you want to and hear. And people often talk about the right to freedom of expression as if it's a right that only exists in the privacy of your own home. So you should be free to express yourself around like-minded individuals or around people in private. But if you say it in public, then you should have to accept the consequences of your speech. Well, it depends entirely on what that speech is. Like I said, if you're breaking the law, then yes, you should be stopped from doing that. You're trying to incite violence. Yes, you should be stopped from doing that. But if you are expressing a view or an opinion, even if it's hugely unpopular, then no, we shouldn't be stopping you from doing that, because we are now inhibiting your conscience and your freedom of conscience, your ability to operate in the world. I talked before about the importance of this right, and about how it's really about the ability and protecting our ability to speak truth to power. But think about that. You speak truth to power when you are confronting that power. So speaking publicly in opposition on a particular issue, or speaking out for a particular issue, giving voice to that in public, is exactly where you need the right to freedom of expression. So the idea that, you shouldn't be free from consequences, and if they just want to kick you off their platforms and basically remove your voice, then that's fine. That's an absurdity, because what you're effectively saying is that you can speak truth to power as long as you don't really speak truth to power. You just speak truth to power in the privacy of your own home. Or you speak truth to power with groups of people who agree with you. Well, that's not speaking truth to power. The whole thing about speaking truth to power is you actually have to give voice in a very public way to your thoughts, your views, your opinions on a particular issue. And it is really troubling. Although at the moment I think these companies are dabbling in what you might call the low-hanging fruit, the more shallow end of the pool, by banning certain actors from their platforms. The simple fact is that, as the old Niemöller poem from Germany goes, first they came for the communists, I didn't say a word, and he rattles off that list, and then finally, and then they came for the Jews, and then finally they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me. And the point is that you don't want to create a system whereby freedom of conscience is actually impinged. That's a really dangerous place to be. There's plenty of totalitarian regimes we could point to, both past and present, whereby freedom of conscience is not respected, and that is not a good thing. Those societies are not happy, healthy places where I think any sane or rational person would want to live. I think what it boils down to is a lot of people are happy to cheer and clap when they see these bans being enacted on Facebook and other social media platforms, because they're quite happy about it. They see this as ridding the world of some dark, brutal, barbaric past, building a brave new world. And you do that by ridding and stomping all over those people who don't buy in and who won't agree with what you want them to agree to. And of course, I guess, who wants to live in a brave new world which starts with an act of barbarity of its own, where the very founding basis of that brave new world is that we will actually conform your conscience to ours. We will expect your conscience to be conformed to ours. And that's a real big problem. Ultimately, I think it also points to a fact that maybe there's certain people who are afraid of these views and opinions. That's the kind of irony, the old Streisand effect. They're actually amplifying these things by doing this anyway. But it does seem to me that if you genuinely had the majority of the populace who were in agreement with you, you would not need to enact these kind of draconian type approaches, because you wouldn't need to, because people would agree with you. People would agree with you. You do this because your ideology is effectively either not gaining the traction you want it to, so you have to try and use force to get your way, or you do this because your ideology is losing ground. And this is sort of the last gasp of a sort of tyrannical ideology, is to start enforcing its will upon people because they know that the majority are not really with them. So it's an interesting thing. It's a troubling thing, but I think sooner or later we are going to have to get to a point where governments are going to actually have to start making some basic regulatory frameworks and put policy requirements on social media, because it's the new public square. And I don't mean arbitrary policy frameworks. I mean just and proper frameworks that are built around those natural law rights around freedom of conscience, and basically requiring social media corporations to act the same way that, for example, the telephone company does. And so they can't, like, they have terms of service, sure, but those terms of service are not unjust. They are not creeping into areas where they have no right to be, like demanding that you conform to certain acts of speech. And I think, by the way, there's nothing inconsistent about that at all, because I know some people say, oh, but aren't you for free markets? Well, I'm not really a free market capitalist. I never have been. I'm not a socialist or a communist by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not a free market capitalist either. I believe markets, that they're economic entities, but they need to have governing sort of ethical principles. Otherwise, it's simply a matter of the strong who get to dominate the weak, those who have the most power. So you've got to have basic frameworks in place. Even people who are diehard free market economists, real libertarian free market principles, they're still expecting the market to be governed by those principles. So they're not objective in that. They're not taking an unbiased stance. They're saying, well, these are the principles I think should be applied. I'm not in agreement on that. And I think that in a situation like this is a clear example where you can't just hope and assume that the market will solve itself. It really doesn't really do that. Question time. Daduda has asked me, am I excited about Denis Villeneuve, sorry. Shouldn't have had that whiskey. Picked a bad week to give up cocaine. His new adaptation of Dune. Yeah, I actually kind of am. I loved what he's done with some of his previous outings. And I think in many ways he's probably the ideal person to be doing that. Maybe David Fincher is the sort of the backup option. But yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to that. My brother Tim, who lives in Canada, he's a huge fan of Dune. He was the big Dune fan in the family. And yeah, he's the guy who will give me the real thorough and intellectual critique of it. But I think Dune offers so many possibilities. It's such a great concept in that novel. And yeah, I think particularly the visual aspects. The only concern I have is if they sacrifice the sort of the heart of the story and the sort of the guts of what that story actually was for the sake of these amazing and beautiful visuals. I think you've got to do both. If they can do that, then I'll be pretty happy. Okay, so Black 47. I watched Black 47 on the weekend and I loved it. I highly recommend this film if you haven't seen it. This was one of those little surprise gems. I had not heard about it until I stumbled across it. It's on iTunes. I think in some jurisdictions they've even got it on Netflix as well. But I don't think that's everywhere. It's a new release to home theatre. So it's a newish film. It's an Irish movie. It is a really, really good film. It tells a story that's set in one of the most brutal and difficult periods of Irish history, which was during the period where the English occupation of Ireland was particularly unjust, and then that was coupled with the famine, where they had people living in situations, living and dying in this sort of abject starvation, and then also on top of that you've got unjust practices that are certain English landlords, not all of them, but people were being treated in very harsh and bad ways, and it had a huge impact upon Ireland. And it's important to understand that period because it makes sense of why there's such an animosity between the UK and Ireland and sort of the history of that. This film, Black 47, is set in that period. It's about a guy. It's kind of effectively like an Irish version of Braveheart, if you like. It's about a guy who comes back from having fought the war for the English, which was quite a common thing. They talked about taking the king's shilling, agreeing to get your basic payment to go and fight for England. And he's come back from one of these wars, and his family is treated. There's a sort of horrible thing that happens to his family, and they've been treated really badly. And then basically it becomes about him, just effectively like Braveheart, really, who goes on a quest to try and, it's vigilante justice, but he's trying to get justice against those who have wronged his family. It's very well made. It's very well acted. It's clearly working with a budget, but I thought they used their budget really, really well. And like I said, this is a real sort of diamond in the rough. I hadn't heard anything about this film. I gave it a chance, and I was really glad that I did. Hugo Weaving is in it. Stephen Ray is back. It's great to see him on the big screen, or the little big screen again. It's a really good film, and well filmed, well acted, and it gives some kind of important insights into that period of history. Game of Thrones. For those of you who have been watching my channel for a while, you will know that I stopped watching Game of Thrones some seasons ago. For those who are regular watchers to my channel, you'll know that I'm a religious believer. I'm a Christian. And for me, I made what at the time was kind of a difficult decision, actually, which was to say I'm not going to watch Game of Thrones anymore because I'm just not happy to be feeding myself on a steady diet of this stuff. Just sort of what you might call despair porn, literally porn at times, and also that sort of despair porn. It was quite a dark thing. Now, don't get me wrong, there's no doubt there was some great writing in there. There was some great storytelling, but for me, I guess it was about asking that question, what goods are worth having and at what price? And so that's what that's the decision that I made. And if you're a regular watcher of my channel, you've been watching for a few years now, you'll know I made a video sort of explaining my stance and why I've done that. However, I have friends and people I'm connected with on social media who are big fans of the show. And I've another question. Am I going to watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? Yeah, I think I probably will. See if it actually lifts back the curtain, gives us the full story of what's really going on. But I have caught up with not the latest episode, but the previous episode, the one just been last week's episode, and about how disastrous that whole battle was. I watched Mauler's video, which I found thoroughly enjoyable. I don't know, maybe it's the cynical, told you so, old curmudgeonly old man in me or something. But I thought it was quite funny, Mauler's take on that whole battle scene. And it honestly, it just, man, it clearly they didn't execute it well, that episode. But I guess the question I have, and feel free to ask away, folks, or to let me know what you think in the comments here. Are you now a little bit worried about the upcoming new trilogy? Not the completion of the current trilogy, but the new trilogy that our two friends who have been charged with looking after Game of Thrones are now also have been given their own trilogy for Star Wars. So Benioff and Weiss, who've got their own Star Wars trilogy coming up. What do you think? Are you worried now based on what happened? As I understand it, it's a trilogy, Obi-Wan reviews. Isn't that right? Have I got that wrong? Maybe it's a series. I thought it was a trilogy. I thought they were making a trilogy. I'm real good at maths, so. I thought it was a trilogy. If I've got that wrong, please feel free to shout at me wildly from the rooftops. Yes. So where was I? Yes. Now this is what I think. Everyone here is talking already about Rian Johnson and the repeat of this. It's Oh, thanks, Chris. You missed the old synth intro to the videos. Any chance of bringing it back? I don't know. Maybe I will one day. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. I think, so obviously everyone here is already talking about a Rian Johnson-esque outcome, and I have a funny feeling it could well be that, you know. Remember how excited we were when we heard that Rian Johnson was directing, well, some of us were, directing a Star Wars film because of Looper. And we thought, wow, because I enjoyed Looper. It's in my collection. I think Looper's a good film. I know some people are kind of critical of it, but I actually thought it was a good outing. And then what happened in Star Wars was, well, let's not talk about that. But it was a mare. It was an absolute mare of an outcome. And all of a sudden we were like, what happened there? I have a sneaky suspicion that this new trilogy could end up going the same way, because it seems that when these two guys were working with material, pre-existing material that was somebody else's, they were okay. They're working with the novel content, but then once they had to start creating, bringing their own creative obligations and their own creative input to the table, all of a sudden we got what we've been served up now. And I understand, obviously I'm not watching it, but I know that some people are not happy with the latest episode either. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And but I do suspect there's a few people who are a little bit more nervous now about what this means for the new trilogy and whether or not we're going to see some repeats there. The only other thing I really wanted to talk about today was Sonic the Hedgehog. And I'm sure you've all been following this. Sorry, just let me put my guitar back properly, because it's resonating at me. Sonic the Hedgehog. And I'm sure you all know the controversy around this, where they released the trailer for Sonic. It's a trap Productions. How are you, mate? Big Sonic fan here. Awesome, wearing a Sonic t-shirt right now. So a lot of people were quite, there was a bit of unhappiness, shall we say, about the look of Sonic. And there was a big outcry about that. And the director of that film, let me bring up the article here now, Jeff Fowler basically announced that Sonic would get a redesign following intense backlash online. Yeah, you're right, Josie M. The Mandalorian does look good, eh? So here's the thing. I know some people have been saying, hey, Star Wars and Disney film and Lucasfilm and Disney and Kathleen Kennedy, they could learn a thing or two from Jeff Fowler and the fact that they're going to change Sonic to meet the demands of the fans. Couple of things here for me. First of all, I don't know if they had any other choice, really. Because, I love Sonic as a video game, and when I was a kid, it was sort of one of those staples. It was one of those things that when you were supposed to be doing computer science in computer science class, you were often sneakily playing Sonic instead. And it's got a lot of nostalgia benefit. A lot of people love it. But it's not a huge cash cow of a film property. It's a great, it's big in the video game space, right? And it's got all that history and nostalgia. But as a film property, Sonic the Hedgehog, it's certainly not Star Wars. It's certainly not Marvel. And so I think they understood that if your sort of core fan base is getting upset and saying, we don't like what you're doing here, I kind of think they had very little choice, did they? I think they would have to actually make adjustments, because otherwise they'd end up releasing a movie under huge negative press, and it's already on the back foot as far as trying to make money goes. I think it would seem to me that they kind of had no choice. Secondly, but if this was a bigger property that maybe had more sellability, I don't know if they would have done that. Would they have actually changed the character? Brothers in Bloom is a good film. I haven't seen it yet. I will check that out. Yeah, you're right. Sonic is being made by Paramount. They cannot afford any flops going forward. Yeah, you're right. It's exactly right. And so that's what my thinking is. I think because they can't afford any flops, surely they had to react this way and say, oh, no, trust us. We're going to fix this. But if it was a bigger property and they could take more risks, or they had the financial freedom to not worry about that, I don't know if they would have done that. Secondly, a lot of people saying, well, Star Wars should actually follow suit. I'm not sure. Now, please hear me out. Because, as you well know, those who've been watching my channel for a while, yeah, that's a good question, Obi-Wan Reviews. What if it was actually marketing genius? And it could well be, because what's happening now, everyone's talking about Sonic. Everyone is talking about Sonic. Even if they don't follow through and deliver a character that's anything that's hugely different from now, everyone knows about this film now. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a good point about the poster. There was a backlash to the original poster. They've known about this for a while, and still they persisted. Who knows? I'm suspicious about how much they will change, actually. But anyway, so Star Wars, getting back to Star Wars, people saying, well, Star Wars should follow suit. And other filmmakers could learn a lesson from these guys, and they are, and they should listen to their fans, and if their fans tell them they don't like something, so they should change it. I'm not so sure about that. I kind of believe that it's really important for creators to actually have that basic modicum of creative freedom. And I think they should have the freedom to actually create and even put their own stamp onto things. To me, that was never the problem with The Last Jedi. And that's not the problem really that Star Wars is dealing with now. It was that what we ended up with was not actually was created by people who didn't seem to understand the heart of the mythology that they were working with. They didn't seem to have much respect for it. Instead, they wanted to use it as a political preaching vehicle. Instead, they wanted to just impose weird things onto it. Things that even artistically aren't particularly good. Forget about whether you agree or disagree with them. They're not well executed. There was just not that care that was taken. And I don't think, hey, Chris K, thanks for the super chat there. Game of Thrones went from the War of the Roses to This Is Us. Oh, true. So that you're right, yeah, there we go. It's a Trap Productions. They didn't understand Star Wars. All Disney saw was money and, like you said, politics. Yeah, and I think that was the problem. Now, I don't think the opposite to that problem and the way to solve that problem is to say, right, let's have the fans tell us what we should make, because I think most of us would agree that one of the big problems we've seen here is sort of creativity by committee, and it's usually that committee of bean counters, the financial controllers, who have said, we want you to make this type of movie, because that'll make us lots of money. And so you get this committee start imposing their will on the creative freedom of those who should be allowed to have the freedom to get creative. And so I think you don't want to see a situation where you just have a sort of the people who scream the loudest on Twitter or on social media get to direct and dictate where a film goes. And I think that the way to resolve the Star Wars problem is not by having lots of screaming people saying, you should do this and you should do that. I think what we need is actually people who have creative, who have a love and a passion for the properties, and who are creatively savvy enough to actually be in the roles that they're given. That's why I'm excited about The Mandalorian, because I think The Mandalorian is you got two guys at the helm who know and have a love for this franchise clearly. And yeah, that's right, Child Harold. There was a Starbucks cup in the Game of Thrones episode last night. Did everyone see that? Because I tell you what, all of the mainstream media outlets in my country, you'd think there was nothing to report on in New Zealand because they were covering that story about the Game of Thrones cup. Tells you everything about the state of the media. But anyway, I think with The Mandalorian, you see that people who have creative passion in there. G'day, Golden Wings, how are you? And so people who have a creative passion who are actually in charge of this thing, and I think we're going to see a better result. Well, I'm hoping we see a better result. I'm optimistically hopeful about that. But the way to solve the Star Wars problem is not to adopt the Sonic model of just whoever screams the loudest on social media. To me, that's not. You've got to give writers their creative freedom. This is okay. Who's this? Old Soul. Agreed. Writers and directors should have freedom, but don't attack the fans when your creative freedom produced flawed storytelling and political agendas. Thank you, Old Soul. That's exactly it. That's exactly what I think as well. It's both and. It's not either or. You don't get there with a screaming mob at all. Let's have a look at some comments now. Most people would agree Game of Thrones lost it after season 4, which is when it started heavily diverging from the books. As I said, I haven't watched in a few seasons, so I couldn't confirm or deny that. What do others think? Let me know what you think. Doc 00777. With regards to The Last Jedi, why would you make a standalone with a political or art statement as a chapter of a larger story? Definitely different problem from Sonic. Yeah, you're right. The Last Jedi does not feel like a sequel trilogy film, does it? It feels like the standard. In fact, it feels like the end of a trilogy. It doesn't feel like something in a trilogy. Destiny Captain. Disney doesn't have the same problem at Marvel Studios. Yeah, that's a good point. So why is that? Why is it that this seems to be confined to one of their properties and not the other? Again, I think this comes down to who has creative control. However, I don't know if Marvel will, when they're going to get into this next phase of the cinematic universe, will they still keep delivering? I'm suspicious about that. I think with the loss of Robert Downey Jr., with some of your existing characters, Iron Man, Captain America, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out and whether they're going to have those same sort of charismatic acting personalities to keep this going, or whether they might fall into some of these same traps. Yeah. I still don't, so It's a Trap Production says, I still don't understand how Dave Filoni was not given creative control over Star Wars. Yeah, I agree. Why was he not given creative control? He worked with George Lucas on Clone Wars. Maybe he wouldn't be a studio head, but just the creative oversight. Well, I think this is a guy who did his tutelage and did his apprenticeship under Lucas, right? So why wouldn't you actually give a guy like that control? Unless you aren't quite as savvy as maybe everyone thought you were. So Kathleen Kennedy was certainly celebrated and hyped as being this really savvy, business controller of the enterprise, but I don't think that's turned out to be the case. And perhaps also if you've got political agendas and you don't really think that you want to give too much control over in that situation. Dinosaur Productions asks, what did you think of Aquaman and Shazam? Well, I'm kind of a little bit, should I say, embarrassed to say that I have not seen either of those two films yet. Sorry, I'm getting Facebook messages popping in there. I have not seen either of those two films yet. I'm a busy father of 5. In fact, it's my eldest daughter's birthday today, so I'm going to have to get going soon. But I'm a busy father of 5, and I have been involved in some other work that has been hugely demanding of my time over the last 12 months. So some of my movie-going freedoms, if you like, have been a little bit curtailed as I prioritise things. But I am looking forward to, particularly to seeing Shazam. I'm really looking forward to that. Where are we? Yeah, okay, so Golden Wings 02 says this, even the guys making the new Star Wars trilogy have pretty much written themselves into a corner with The Last Jedi. That's why they are bringing back Lando and the Emperor. Well, it kind of does feel a bit like a bit of nostalgic hackery, right? Right? It does feel a little bit like they desperately are looking for ways to try and bring in anyone that they can get to go into a theatre who they have driven away previously. And so they think, well, quick, get some nostalgia points happening. Let's get Lando back in the seat. And he's still wearing the same clothes as well. What's up with that? And so Lando's back. The Emperor's laugh. I don't think they're going to deliver. Well, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think they're going to deliver on actually a real Emperor. I think there's just going to be a recording of something. Here we go. Here's another question. I wonder, from Jason Davies. Hi, Jason. I wonder how much fans' dislike of The Force Awakens as an episode 4 rehash influenced Lucasfilm to go with the subvert expectations route for The Last Jedi. That's a really good question. That is a really good question, because I remember that a lot of people were saying, and even I did too, and I still back this, that after the Force Awakens came out, they could not simply rehash the next two films couldn't simply be rehashes of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. They just couldn't do that. They had to be something new. I suspect, though, the bigger problem was they didn't have good creative collaboration. And it's really clear now, based on the information that's come out since, that what you have is someone creating the second film in the trilogy who's clearly not collaborating with the level of intimacy that you would expect when you're making a trilogy. And it's like the story wasn't properly mapped out. And now it sounds like J.J. Abrams is going to come back and try and course correct again. But I'm suspicious. I'm sorry. I mean, I used to be a big fan of J.J. Abrams, but then what happened with Star Trek made me think, well, is there a bit of hype here? Does this guy really know how to make good original films, or does he just know how to sort of clone things that have gone before in a way that's kind of snazzy and appealing and sort of draws you in, but ultimately isn't really adding much to the conversation in that particular franchise? James Mangold. So here we go. Josie, or is it Jose M? James Mangold, director of Logan, once talked about creative freedom lacking in modern Hollywood filmmaking. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Once creative minds leave, projects fall to hacks. Ironically, he defends Ryan Johnson. And that's a shame because I actually love James Mangold. He did one of the best biopics, I think, that was ever made, Johnny Cash. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a huge Johnny Cash fan. Thanks, Dad. My dad passed away last year, but he gave me a great love of Johnny Cash, the Man in Black. And I think he made one of the best biopics, and he's made one of the best modern westerns after True Grit in the remake of 3:10 to Yuma. And he also made one of the best entries in the superhero genre with Logan. And interestingly enough, the film before Wolverine, so that the film that he made in the lead up to Logan, I think that film speaks to me of a film that very much, where it seems he was probably creatively restrained, because it's a lot better than I think people give it credit for. And you can see a lot of the ideas he was trying to get to, and he really finally does get to in Logan. I think he's right, though, about creative freedom being restrained in Hollywood. And as you say, the irony of defending Ryan Johnson, who it does seem he had almost blank slate, sort of carte blanche freedom to do what he wanted. Ooh. How is it that Joe Johnston wasn't involved with sequel trilogy? Seems like a no-brainer. Yeah, good question. Define the sequel trilogy in 3 words. In 3 words? I don't know if I can do 3 words, but... maybe I can. It's a question. Is it over? Are we there yet? Because I'm kind of just looking forward to this coming to an end. Daniel Wright says this: I took my family to Endgame. We enjoyed it, even with the acceptable flaws. I can hope, in capitals, good man, that episode 9 is 3/4 as good. I guess you mean I can only hope. I guess that's what we all only hope for, Daniel. But I'm a man of hope. Being a religious man, a man of the resurrection, I'm always going to be a man of hope, but I'm also a realist. And I look at things as the way they are, and I think, the old spark of the light side is fading a little bit there. But then there's always the Mandalorian. Endgame, was a good film though overall. Well, it was an enjoyable experience despite its flaws, that's for sure. Carlos Miguel Ogalade, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Carlos. Terrible. That's my Kiwi accent. Those who have seen Thor Ragnarok. By the way, if you haven't seen Thor Ragnarok, or if you rent it, make sure you watch the introduction with Taika Waititi's. Watch the film with Taika Waititi's introduction, where he introduces the film for about 2 minutes before it starts. It's classic Kiwi humour. G'day guys, my name's Korg. So, and it's very much in that style, and it's well worth a watch. So Carlos, do you think J.J. Abrams should have had control over 3 movies? Well, I think that would have been a better option, surely. If you want creative continuity, then surely you've got to actually give space for that continuity. Even Lucas, who his original trilogy, where he's got other directors involved, it's his story that's being outworked, and he still has this creative oversight. And he's kind of like the great oracle they go to. The Bible they reference everything back to. He knows what's going on here, what should be happening. But here's the thing: would JJ have done much? I mean, I think it would have been better than The Last Jedi, but JJ and his tendency for mystery boxes and things like that, would he have actually just painted himself into some odd corners along the way by creating mystery boxes in this trilogy and then not delivering? Because that is a very real possibility. That could well have happened in this situation too. Thanks, Child Harold. Says, happy birthday to your daughter. Lovely father, lovely daughter. Well, thankfully she takes after her mother. That's also lucky for her too. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of my eldest. I'm pretty proud of all of them, in fact. And I don't know what I've done right, but I've done enough. My flawed, stumbling humanity as a father, I've managed to do enough. I bow to you, sir. No, don't bow to me. It's a trap. Josie says, it's a trap. Okay. Kathleen Kennedy, William Gendron says, Kathleen Kennedy also made strange executive decisions, i.e. solo hiring and firing certain directors, orchestrating the overarching plot of the trilogy, and the Force is female. Yeah, you're right. There's plenty of mistakes. I think, too, that she probably does wear the rap for a little bit too much as well. I think probably some people at Lucasfilm may be quite happy that she is the sort of the scapegoat, and they're happy to let it fall on her, because I think it's more than just her. I do suspect others who have quietly stood back as the fan reaction has been quite negative and sort of kept their mouths shut in the hope that no one will notice them, probably should have taken a bit more of the rap as well. Um, where are we? Do you agree? So Jeremiah McDonald, do you agree with Disney taking so much content and lore out of Star Wars canon without having a plan to fill it in with equally substantial stories? Yeah, I do actually. I think that was a absolutely bizarre decision. If I was handed one of the most lucrative franchises in filmmaking history, one of the most popular cinematic franchises, and I am handed this thing with a ton of lore and a ton of canon and all of these unmade stories that exist in the world but not on celluloid yet, and they're not on screen, why wouldn't you take that and make that? Like this is a no-brainer. Even if you want to be a pure utilitarian and look solely at utilitarian outcomes and financial bottom lines, it's a no-brainer. You don't have to take a lot of money and spend lots of time developing something from scratch if you've got pre-existing stories that are really well loved by an existing fan base. I really don't get that. I really don't get that. To me, that was one of the big, absolutely clumsy oversights. No, not an oversight. It's a terrible decision that they made. Why the heck would you do that? To me, from a business perspective, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I still can't get my head around what they were thinking there, why they did that. Daniel says Endgame was a good movie. I shouldn't be talking about Endgame. Thor's arc was full of growth. Well, literally. Oh, it's good to see comedic Thor. Golden Wing says, I feel the main thing that the new Star Wars lacks is emotion. All the new characters lack any humanity and all the old characters are dead. Yeah, well, it's kind of like that. I agree with that. They're a bit robotic. They feel like paint by numbers things on a screen. There's sort of something lacking there. Yeah, here we go. Chris K replied to that and said, no sexual tension or innuendo. Plinkett pointed this out. Related to lack of humanity, obviously. How good is Red Letter Media, by the way? I love their channel. It's a lot of fun. I don't always agree with everything, but I still enjoy their channel. They don't get enough credit, I don't think. They've probably changed the game on YouTube, that's for sure, about how movies are reviewed and how people talk about films, and probably gave a lot of people an education on how to understand film and storytelling in that arena. But yeah, so getting back to Chris K, no sexual tension or innuendo. I think really what it is there's no humanity between the characters. There's the whole idea of eros is missing because the whole idea of authentic self-giving love is missing from these characters. They just exist on a page in many ways to fulfill utilitarian outcomes. They exist to perhaps be political mouthpieces. They exist to get a story from one point to another, but not naturally, organically, just we'll use them as an artificial device to do it. And I think there's a lot of that lacking. No one's ever really gone. Yes, no one's ever really gone. Please, no, leave them dead. Please leave them dead. Let's not resurrect them. Porkins. He's coming back. Porkins, the solo film. The movie you've all been waiting for. What's wrong with you, Star Wars fans? Why didn't you want to watch a film all about Porkins? You're obviously hateful white bigots. Okay. Destiny Captain. The hiring and firings and extensive reshoots are not the sign of a seasoned executive with a steady hand. It's the sign of a person making it up as they go. Yeah, there does seem to be a lot of hirings and firings in top positions, which seem weird. It's not unusual for you to have a situation where you have to hire or fire someone off a film, but it does seem when you've got a lot of them happening, I don't know. How did you feel about the Joaquin Phoenix Joker trailer? Interesting. Let's see where they go with it. If they produce a movie that is little more than a promo for Antifa, I'll be annoyed. But if they actually get that character and take him into some of the great graphic novel territory, then yeah, that'd be awesome. Yeah, that would be really, really good. Okay. Do you think Game of Thrones has gone Star Wars recently? And well, we were just talking about that before, about... welcome, by the way, Toasty Toasty. Can't beat a Toasty Toasty. I don't know if where you guys are in the world, but in New Zealand, a Toasty bar is like a piece of marshmallow covered in chocolate. But you see, you probably wouldn't want a toasty one of those. It would be melted. But anyway, do you think Game of Thrones has gone Star Wars recently? Well, look, I've stopped watching a couple of seasons ago. I won't relitigate that fact. But yeah, it does seem that based on the latest couple of episodes and what I've understood of particularly the episode before last, that they've definitely wandered off the reservation and gone into territory where they just weren't equipped for. Yes, s'mores. Yeah, we do have s'mores. My sister-in-law's Canadian, and we celebrated Thanksgiving a couple of years ago over here in New Zealand, and we have a brazier, an outside fire. Oh, it's not a fire pit. A brazier is you're probably used to seeing them made of wrought iron. You put wood into them and light the fire, and you sit around them outside. My brazier is made out of the old inside agitator of a washing machine, a metal agitator. The metal drum of an old washing machine that spins around, and it's already got all the pre-drilled holes from the washing machine where the water would come in. And man, it's just totally enclosed, but the heat just pumps out, and our kids sit over the top of that roasting marshmallows. Daniel Sandoval says the characters like Ray and Finn and Rose are just there to showcase diversity. I don't think Kennedy even cares about profit anymore. Now, initially I was a bit skeptical about that idea, Daniel, but then the way they have treated Finn as a character, I don't think he's been properly developed. And if I was John Boyega, I'd be kind of frustrated by the way that character has been treated. Never go full Star Wars. Okay. Destiny Captain says, Left Foot Media, I haven't heard you talk much about Star Trek. What are your opinions? Well, maybe I might get into that actually in future. My wife is the Trekkie in our house. And she loves Jean-Luc Picard. That was her captain. I always used to tease her about that. I always used to have her on about how I was going to sort of shave my head one day. Make it so. But she loves Picard. Him and Harrison Ford. So I used to wander around doing this, and then I'd say, "Get off my plane," and she'd hate it. But yeah, my wife is the Trekkie. We're probably bigger fans. Well, I'm a bigger fan of the original Star Trek series. I love that because for me, it's got such childhood nostalgia. My favorite film is The Search for Spock. I don't know why, but I love that film. And I don't know why it doesn't get more notoriety. I really love that film. For me, it is my favorite Star Trek film of all time. There's just something about The Search for Spock that has such a great atmosphere. And I don't know. I think some of the diehard Trekkies didn't like it because it wandered away from what Trek was, the more science fiction. But I loved it. To me, it just, that film, there's something about the atmosphere and the mythology in that film that I really, really loved. Picard is my captain too. There you go. Finn should have been the stormtrooper that defected and became a Jedi, not the comedic sidekick. Yeah, that's really true. Okay, team. Well, I'm going to have to wrap it up because the kids are coming home from school soon. So I'm going to have to go and do some fatherly duties and then get back into a bit of office work. But it's been great to be with you here. Just to finish with, I'm going to do a weekly live stream every week. I'm going to do that's my ambition. That's my commitment here to do. Yeah, that's right. Who's quoted it? You killed my son, you Klingon bastard. What a great line. Even better than God. But yeah, I'm going to do a weekly live stream. This is first time live streaming, and it's awesome to be in the zone. I really love the space. And what I want to do is actually, I've got a couple of ideas. I'm thinking about doing a live stream just for blokes, actually. I mean, anyone can join, obviously, but especially for men and talking about masculinity and male issues. I don't profess to be any great guru, but I'm a guy who's made enough mistakes to learn a few lessons along the way, and I'm happy to sort of share some thoughts and then engage with people on some of those issues, because I think a lot of us blokes are left to our own devices today. We are often looked down upon. We are called toxic. We are blamed for a lot of things, but there's very little actual support and help and community that's built for men to actually live out authentic, life-giving masculinity. I'm actually thinking about maybe starting a live stream called, I'm just toying with the name at the moment, maybe In the Shed, just for blokes. Anyone could join. Ladies, you're most welcome. If you're ladies lurking with intent there, that's fine as well. But sort of talking to blokes about male issues and how to do that sort of stuff well. But also a regular live stream too, just sort of like we've done today, just sort of 3 or 4 recent news items, just talking about them and having a conversation and engaging with you guys. It's a trap, says, I don't know, LFM, as a fellow toxic bloke, I think you're a great man. Well, that's very kind of you. I do my best. I'm, as I said, I'm not a guru, and anyone who presents themselves as being an expert who knows all about everything is someone to be very careful of, because if they're honest, they'll make plenty of mistakes, like we all do along the way. But I think we can learn from each other. My father used to say to me, life is too short to make all the mistakes yourself, so make sure you learn from other people. So, anyway, that's me. How about Out in the Garage? I haven't even got a name yet. Maybe I'll do a poll and people can tell me what they think the name is. You guys are awesome. I love having you as my subscriber, my fan base. There's some really committed people in the fan base here, and it's kind of awesome. I'm humbled by it, and I really mean that. I'm not just doing the fake emotive thing here. It's kind of, I feel quite privileged to be able to engage with you guys in the small way that I can. If you like the content I'm creating and you want to see more of it, please support the channel. There's links for how you can do that in the description below. Everyone who is supporting the channel, you guys are awesome. It allows me to keep putting the content out that I am, the small amount that I am. So yeah, awesome. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.